There is a strange contradiction at the center of Archer. It looks more realistic than almost any American animated sitcom of its era, yet much of its signature style came from doing less animation, not more. Characters often hold a pose, bodies barely move during long conversations, and somehow the result feels less like a cheap cartoon and more like a live-action spy series that has been flattened into ink. That contradiction was not an accident. It was the solution to a production problem. When Archer arrived on FX in 2009, creator Adam Reed was not building his visual language from scratch. Reed and producer Matt Thompson had already spent years making television under severe limits. On Sealab 2021, they had learned how far dialogue, editing, and timing could carry images that were barely moving. On Frisky Dingo, their team pushed further, using photographs of real people as drawing reference and combining them with digital environments. Archer inherited that approach, but aimed it at a different target, not a deliberately crude cable cartoon, but the polished fantasy world of spies, expensive clothes, sleek offices, guns, cars, and international travel. That created a problem. A realistic-looking world usually demands more visual information, more accurate anatomy, more convincing perspective, more detailed locations, more specific props. All of that costs time. So the Archer team separated realism from fluidity. The characters were not designed like elastic cartoon bodies built for constant motion. Real models were dressed in costumes and photographed in different poses. Illustrators used those photographs as reference, then built the characters in Adobe Illustrator. The result was a human figure with relatively believable proportions, weight, posture, and clothing. But those figures were not redrawn from scratch for every frame. Instead, body parts could be separated and reused. Arms, hands, heads, mouths, and other elements could be treated almost like pieces of a digital puppet. In Adobe After Effects, animators could rotate, reposition, replace, and composite those parts to create a performance. That is one reason Archer can produce an uncanny impression. The people look observed from reality, but they move with the controlled economy of cutout animation. The backgrounds pushed in the opposite direction. Early in production, environments could be constructed in 3D so the team could choose camera angles and maintain perspective. Those renders were then painted and refined into rich 2D backgrounds. A room might begin as geometry, become a digital painting, and finally receive 2D characters assembled on top of it. So Archer was never simply 2D animation. It was a hybrid system designed to make different technologies disappear into one image. Then came the line. Art director Neil Holman has described how, during the pilot, the team wanted to avoid the razor-thin outlines associated with major primetime cartoons such as The Simpsons and Family Guy. They looked instead toward comic book artists of the 1960s and 1970s, including Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. The thick black contour did several jobs at once. It gave the characters graphic force, it helped them separate from detailed painted backgrounds, and it made the show feel less like a conventional TV cartoon and more like a moving illustration. That choice mattered because Archer was balancing two visual impulses that should have fought each other. The bodies and environments wanted realism, the outlines wanted graphic simplification. Put them together, and the show landed in a narrow space between comic book art, fashion illustration, motion graphics, and live-action cinematography. The same principle shaped production design. The team did not invent every location from a blank page. Artists researched real architecture, vehicles, weapons, furniture, and clothing, then recombined those references into a world that felt plausible, without being pinned neatly to one decade. That matters because Archer's realism is not the realism of a documentary. It is the realism of a spy movie remembered through design. A room needs enough architectural logic to feel occupiable. A pistol needs enough specificity to feel like an object with weight. A suit needs to hang on a body like clothing, rather than like a painted symbol. Once those details feel credible, the series can place absurd behavior inside them without losing the world. It also helps explain the show's peculiar relationship with time. The visual language can suggest the Cold War, mid-century offices, vintage tailoring, later technology, and contemporary references without resolving them into a clean historical date. Instead of building a strict period piece, the production cherry-picks the visual vocabulary of spy fiction. That ambiguity gives the backgrounds and props another job. They do not simply tell us where the characters are. They keep the entire series suspended inside a stylized version of espionage culture. But the most important part of the look may be what the characters do not do. In many dialogue scenes, the bodies remain relatively locked. A character may change an expression, move a hand, turn a head, or shift position, but the scene is not constantly filled with broad physical acting. That was partly practical. Neil Holman has said that Adam Reed often wrote with those limitations in mind. The show's bread and butter was people talking in tight compositions, where elaborate full-body movement was unnecessary. Normally, that might make a cartoon feel dead. Archer solved the problem by moving the energy somewhere else, into the voices. The dialogue was recorded before animation, and Reed placed enormous importance on the audio edit. The timing of interruptions, pauses, insults, callbacks, and sudden cuts could be locked before the visual performance was built. The image did not have to manufacture all the comedy. It had to frame comedy that already worked as sound. That relationship explains why the stillness feels intentional. When two characters are destroying each other verbally, constant motion could become noise. Archer often lets the body hold while the dialogue accelerates. And then, because the ordinary scenes are restrained, movement becomes valuable. The production could save its more complicated work for the moments that needed scale. A vehicle crash, a fight, a chase, a moving camera, an explosion. Holman described the challenge as finding the middle ground between the coolest version of a scene and the cheapest version they could actually produce on schedule. That is not a glamorous artistic philosophy. It is a television production philosophy. But it became an aesthetic. A quiet office scene could be assembled from reusable character rigs and controlled poses. A major action sequence could combine painted 2D environments, 3D vehicles, layered effects, and more specialized animation. The contrast made those sequences feel larger because the show had not been spending maximum motion every second. Over time, the pipeline became more sophisticated. Later seasons used additional tools, including Toon Boom Harmony for more fluid action, and the team developed more elaborate lighting, compositing, 3D work, and environmental effects. Yet the goal was usually not to replace the original style. It was to extend it without making Archer stop looking like Archer. That is harder than it sounds. Most animated series can change their subject while keeping their visual world stable. Archer repeatedly changed the visual world itself. It moved through different locations, genres, periods, and fantasy scenarios. The Coma seasons alone asked the production to reinterpret the cast through noir, pulp adventure, and science fiction. The reason those shifts remained recognizable was that the show's identity was never just one office, one costume, or one color palette. It was a production grammar, realistic reference, bold contour, painted depth, limited character motion, precise audio timing, and selective bursts of cinematic spectacle. By the final years, members of the production team described the show as something close to a reverse-engineered live-action television series. That may be the clearest explanation for why Archer still feels unusual. It does not ask, how should a cartoon spy move? It asks, how would we stage this if it were a spy show? Then it finds the cheapest, smartest combination of illustration, compositing, 3D, and limited animation that can create that impression. And that is why the stiffness is not a flaw separate from the beauty. The stiffness helped create the beauty. Archer looks different because its creators did not try to win the same contest as other cartoons. They were not chasing the most fluid movement, the most exaggerated bodies, or the broadest expressions. They built a system where realism came from reference and design, comedy came from writing and voices, and motion was treated as a resource to spend carefully. The result is a cartoon that often behaves like a motion graphic, frames itself like live action, borrows the authority of comic book ink, and saves animation for the moments when animation matters most. What looks like one of television's most distinctive visual styles began as a set of limitations. The achievement was turning those limitations into rules so consistent that, eventually, they stopped looking like compromises at all.